are so biased. And those biases could very well get you killed. Stick around to find out more as we look at normalcy bias, this time on Proactively Prep.
So what is normalcy bias, and do you have it? Well, there are multiple articles and studies all over the internet, and they all conclude a similar thing. Normalcy bias refers to a mental state people enter when facing a disaster or trauma. It causes people to underestimate both the possibility of a disaster occurring and the severity of its effects. According to the studies, the normalcy bias often results in unnecessary deaths in disaster situations. Lack of preparation for disasters, because they never thought they'd happen, often lead to inadequate shelter, supplies, and evacuation plans. And even when all these things are in place, about 70% of people will check with others before they decide to evacuate. Now, this is a frequent behavior, and sociologists refer to it as milling. And what this is when people find themselves in the middle of trauma or a major disaster, they'll become very docile and very sluggish, and they will begin to visit 3 to 4 people seeking information and trying to find some kind of encouragement about what they should do next. And what they inevitably do is waste precious time that they could be using to escape the danger trying to gain information.
What exactly is it defined? Well, it's a condition of the mind which assumes everything will continue on in the way it normally does, and it produces an inability for us to accept and adapt to changing circumstances.
Now, one doesn't have to look very far to try and find real-life examples of normalcy bias in action. In fact, this article written by Chris Hernandez highlighted the Harvest 91 Festival shooting. That's one that comes to my mind too. Now, if you spend any time watching the video clips or the released cell phone footage, a capture from the folks who were there on the ground in the crowd, you'll see multiple situations where something like this was said. Chris Hernandez highlights the fella in the video clip that's saying, it's fireworks, stop, stop. He's actively trying to calm people down and keep them from fleeing when the thing they ought to be doing is getting to the nearest exit. Look here for an example. So right there you can hear the gentleman saying, it's not real gunshots, it's not real gunshots. And that's just confirming other people who also thought the same thing. Some had said things like, oh, it's coming from the speakers, or it's not real gunshots, or it's fireworks. So there you see the denial. So even there you can see that it took a few minutes. The one gentleman was in denial, having normalcy bias, and it took the voices of a few others to say, no, we need to go, we need to move. That's just one of the many examples that you could find of normalcy bias. I also read an article where they were evaluating interviews of people who made it out of the Twin Towers after that event, and it was the people who reacted immediately who made it to the stairwells and were able to make it out, and they recall seeing a majority of the people stagnant and in place, just unable to move.
Now, sociologists debate about what it is that causes this. There are 3 main assertions that are made. One is that it's the shock itself, that in any traumatic event, there is a physiological effect that prevents your mind and your body from doing what it ought to do. Then there are others who would appeal to the ancestral or instinctual nature of the human body and the human mind, that really what we're doing in freezing is attempting to mimic the defense of some animals in nature, whereby freezing, staying still, might camouflage you or cause you to become an unappealing target that perhaps, if the odds are in your favor, the threat would pass by you and leave you in the aftermath. And yet there are others who would appeal to the intellectual mind, that really what causes it is the human's desire to gather information in an attempt to make a rationalized decision The problem is, in any one of these three scenarios, precious moments are still lost. And it's oftentimes those precious moments that is a determining factor as to whether you are a survivor or a statistic. No matter what the true root and base cause of this normalcy bias is, the fact of the matter is it's a very serious problem, and we need to do everything we can to combat this because it has a myriad of negative effects. It prevents us from seeing a threat. It paralyzes our response time. It diminishes our ability to perceive a threat. It may cause us to overlook threat indicators or a threat altogether. Not only that, in daily life, it will prevent us from making sober judgments in how to prepare for a myriad of different threats that we could encounter at any time. It will desensitize us to the fact that we are a very fragile creature in a very hostile environment. What do I do about it? Well, here are a few easy things that you can start to incorporate in your everyday life. It takes a little bit of intentional effort, but after a while it becomes second nature. Number one, start practicing situational awareness. Start to train yourself to be aware of what's going on around you. Keep your head up on a swivel. People watch. Those are the kind of things that can help to train you to better spot threat indicators. Start with all the normal day-to-day errand things. The stores that you go to, the banks that you visit. Identify spots where a threat could be concealed. Don't be ignorant of the government documents, studies, and think tank reports that are available to you as a citizen. Just recently one came out where the energy sector was evaluated by a panel of leading government experts. And they set out to identify weaknesses in our power grid and how susceptible we are to attack from EMP and any other catastrophic events. Don't forget that even they recognize that we have weaknesses and that these are real possibilities. They take steps to prepare, but those steps aren't going to be much help to you in the event that something happens. But just for a sobering fact, the government themselves has estimated that if the grid of the United States were to go down for a period of 6 months, 90% of the U.S. population would perish. 90% of 350 million people would perish within the first year. Those are the kind of things that you have to grapple with and learn to accept, because while they may not be imminently probable, they are possible, and come up with a proactive plan that you can follow so that in the event that it happens, you're not asking questions, but you know what you're to do. And then practice those things. And I'm preaching to myself here. You need to come up with the plans and then practice, drill them out so that it's not just merely a thought exercise, it's a physical and real experience. That will help you in a time when you need it. You can't remain like an ostrich in the sand and separate yourself from the reality of the threats that are out there. If you're a firearm carrying individual, the next thing that you can do is to train with the defensive tools that you do have so that you can use them proficiently and precisely if the need arises. That's one more thing that'll be off the checklist that you don't have to think about in that moment when your mind wants to be cognitively dissident.
Until we meet again, pursue excellence in all things. Be sober, be vigilant, and above all else, steward well the things that God has placed in your care. We'll see you later. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, click the bell notification so you get updates every time I put out a new video.